The Vexthrani broadcasting studio hummed with its usual chaos of 12 different conversations happening simultaneously. Unlike the sterile, silent observation decks of science fiction movies, this place resembled a combination newsroom and comedy club with holographic displays flickering between countless worlds, while the four-armed, purple-skinned hosts gesticulated wildly at each feed. Zixandra, the lead commentator whose mouth moved faster than a hummingbird's wings, adjusted her triple-jointed headset while her secondary arms shuffled through data tablets. "Welcome back to Primitive Planet Chronicles, where we make sense of the senseless," she chattered at light speed. "I'm Zixandra, joined by my co-hosts Blurbaltep, Quickspeak, and Verboseni, and today we're diving into Saw 3, home of the bipedal mammals who call themselves humans. Blurbaltep, whose species evolved from creatures that communicated through rapid clicking, added his own rapid-fire commentary. "These creatures fascinate me, Zix. They've developed something called marriage ceremonies, where they voluntarily bind themselves in legal contracts and celebrate by throwing small plant reproductive organs at each other." The studio erupted in typical Vexthrani laughter. Sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Their screens displayed a human wedding in full swing, complete with rice-throwing and awkward dancing. Quickspeak, whose name was literally unpronounceable in any language that wasn't spoken at triple speed, began his analysis. "Notice how they wear uncomfortable garments, spend fortunes on temporary decorations, and force relatives who despise each other to sit together. It's beautifully illogical." Verboseni, true to her name, launched into an elaborate dissertation about human bonding rituals that would have put university professors to shame, comparing them to the mating dances of 17 different galactic species, while simultaneously providing historical context dating back 4 millennia. The camera drones buzzed around the studio like metallic insects, capturing every gesture as the hosts performed their verbal acrobatics. This wasn't the cold, clinical observation of distant scientists. This was entertainment at its finest, where the most talkative species in the known galaxy had built an empire on commenting about everyone else's business. But wait, Zixandra interrupted, her 4 eyes widening as a new feed appeared. "We're getting reports from our field correspondents about something even more bizarre happening at a human feeding establishment. Apparently, these creatures are voluntarily consuming substances that cause them physical pain and calling it delicious. Our linguistics team is completely baffled." The hosts leaned forward in unison, their natural curiosity overwhelming their professional composure. This was exactly the kind of paradox that made their show the highest-rated program in galactic broadcasting history. The restaurant scene unfolded before them like a bizarre theater performance. A human male sat at a table, tears streaming down, his face, sweat beading on his forehead as he consumed what appeared to be molten lava disguised as food. His companion, a female of the species, was recording his suffering on a small rectangular device while making encouraging sounds. I'm having trouble processing this," Blurbaltep admitted, his usual rapid-fire delivery slowing to merely supersonic speed. "The subject is clearly experiencing distress-elevated heart rate, excessive perspiration, obvious pain responses, yet he continues to consume the substance." Quickspeak, whose commentary typically flowed like a river in flood season, found himself pausing between words. "The female is encouraging this behavior? She's documenting his pain and... Wait, she's smiling? This doesn't match any known biological imperative in our databases." The studio's atmosphere shifted noticeably. The background chatter that typically filled every nanosecond of silence began to diminish as the hosts struggled to maintain their usual breakneck pace of observation and analysis. Verboseni, mid-sentence in what should have been a 47-minute explanation of pain-pleasure responses across different species, simply stopped talking. The silence lasted for 2.3 seconds, an eternity, in Vexthrani broadcasting. Maybe it's medicinal? Zixandra suggested weakly, but even she couldn't inject her usual confidence into the statement. Perhaps the capsaicin compound serves some biological function we haven't identified. The camera feeds multiplied, showing similar scenes across the planet. Humans lined up at establishments, specifically designed to serve painful food. They paid money for the privilege. They brought friends to watch. Some even seemed to compete over who could endure the most suffering. Colleagues, Blurbltep said slowly, his clicking speech pattern becoming almost understandable to non-Vexthrani speakers. I've covered 17 different species feeding behaviors. I've documented everything from rock-eating silicon-based life forms to energy-consuming plasma beings. But this challenges our fundamental understanding of survival instincts. The production staff behind the cameras, usually a whirlwind of activity as they managed feeds from thousands of worlds, had slowed their pace. Some were scratching their heads with whatever appendages they possessed. The makeup artist, a six-legged creature from the arthropod cluster, had actually stopped applying purple powder to Quickspeak's fourth arm. We need to dig deeper, Zixandra declared, though her voice lacked its usual enthusiasm. Perhaps this is an isolated cultural phenomenon. Surely the rest of their behaviors will make sense. The screen shifted to new feeds. Humans jumping out of aircraft with fabric parachutes, others voluntarily entering chambers filled with freezing water, and a particularly concerning scene of humans hitting small white balls into holes, while becoming increasingly frustrated with their lack of success. I'm beginning to think, Burbosani whispered, that we may have encountered something entirely outside our comprehension protocols. The silence that followed wasn't just unusual for Vexthrani broadcasting. It was historically unprecedented. Asterisk, the montage that followed would later be studied in xenopsychology classes across the galaxy as the Great Cometary Collapse of Galactic. Year 47,892. Feed after feed displayed human behavior that seemed to violate every known principle of intelligent life. They're camping, Quickspeak managed to stammer, his usual verbal velocity reduced to a crawl. On screen, humans had abandoned their climate-controlled dwellings to sleep on the ground, in fabric shelters, while being devoured by tiny flying insects. They have perfectly functional houses, with beds and protection from the elements. And they're choosing to live like primitive ancestors. For fun, Blurbltep's clicking had become so slow it was almost melodic. The reproductive celebration rituals are escalating. The feeds showed a gender reveal party where humans had used explosive devices to announce their offspring's biological characteristics. The explosion had accidentally ignited several acres of forest. They're celebrating unborn offspring by destroying their own habitat? The studio's emergency linguistics team had been called in a group of the galaxy's most brilliant minds, who specialized in decoding impossible behavioral patterns. They stood in a cluster beside the main commentary desk, their universal translators, working overtime as they whispered among themselves in 17 different languages, all expressing the same sentiment, complete bafflement. Verbose Amy, who had never in her life failed to provide exhaustive commentary on any subject, sat with her mouth slightly open, watching a feed of Black Friday shopping. Humans were trampling each other to save small amounts of currency on objects they didn't need. Some were fighting over electronic devices. Others were camping outside stores for days, voluntarily exposing themselves to harsh weather conditions to be first in line. To engage in combat shopping, the economic behavior patterns are ... double quotes, she started, then stopped, started again, stopped again. Her forearms gestured helplessly at the screens. Zixandra, the most verbally gifted member of the most verbally gifted species in the galaxy, found herself reduced to single words. Why? She asked the universe. Just ... Why? The feeds continued. Humans paying enormous sums to watch other humans hit balls with sticks. Humans voluntarily running long distances until their bodies nearly collapsed, calling it fun. Humans climbing vertical rock faces for no purpose other than to reach the top and climb back down. Humans dancing in coordinated groups while cameras recorded them, and broadcasting these recordings to strangers for approval ratings called likes. The social media phenomenon is particularly troubling, Blurble observed weakly. They're performing increasingly dangerous activities to gain the attention of beings they've never met, for no material reward, and often at significant personal risk. The screens showed compilation reels, humans balancing on cliff edges for photographs, humans eating dangerous objects for video content, humans participating in something called challenges that seemed designed specifically to cause harm or embarrassment. I think, Quickspeak said very slowly, we may need to contact the Galactic Council of Impossible Things. Does such a council exist? Asked Verbosani. It will after today, Zixandra replied grimly. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted from energetic commentary to something resembling a crisis management center. The host sat in stunned silence as feed after feed displayed human behavior. That seemed to mock the very concept of survival instincts. Asterisk. The breaking point came when their automated content aggregation system, designed to find the most entertaining human behaviors, delivered what would later be known as the Florida Man compilation. The first headline appeared on the main screen. Local man fights alligator to retrieve golf ball. For exactly 4.7 seconds, the Vextrani Broadcasting Studio experienced something that had never occurred in its 847-year history. Complete silence. Not the brief pause between words that occasionally happened when hosts took microsecond breaths. Not the momentary quiet when technical difficulties caused minor delays. This was absolute, total, unprecedented silence from four of the most verbally prolific beings in the known galaxy. Zixandra's mouth moved soundlessly, as if her brain was sending signals her vocal cords simply refused to process. Blurble. Rapid clicking had stopped entirely, leaving him making tiny squeaking sounds like a deflating balloon. Quickspeak lived up to his name by trying to speak quickly, but the words came out as incomprehensible mumbles. Verbosani, who could typically provide 17 different perspectives on any topic, sat completely motionless except for the occasional involuntary twitch of her left eye stalk. The headlines continued scrolling. Woman calls 911 because McDonald's ran out of McNuggets. Man arrested for teaching squirrels to water ski. Florida man claims he's afraid of Florida man after meeting Florida man. Local woman marries Ferris wheel, seeks annulment after getting dizzy. The production staff had stopped working entirely. Camera drones hovered motionless in the air. The makeup artist had dropped her powder brush and was staring at the screen with all 6 eyes. Even the automated systems seemed to be struggling, with several feeds glitching as if the technology itself was having trouble processing what it was witnessing. The subject appears to have voluntarily inserted his head into a washing machine. Blurble finally managed to whisper, to test if it would fit. But why? Quickspeak asked, his voice barely audible. What survival advantage could this possibly provide? What evolutionary pressure could have led to this behavior? What? He trailed off as another headline appeared. Man caught trying to order pizza from alligator. Verbosani made a sound like air escaping from a tire. In my 847 years of xenobiological commentary, she said slowly, covering everything from the crystal beings of Andromeda, who communicate through light refraction, to the gas giants of Centauri, who exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. I have never encountered a species that so completely defies the basic principles of existence. The final headline broke whatever remaining composure they had left. Florida man. Arrested for attempting to barbecue alligator with fireworks. Claims he was just trying to help. Zixandra stood up slowly, her forearms hanging limply at her sides. "We have protocols," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "for documenting 50,000 species across 47 galaxies. We have commentary frameworks for every conceivable behavior pattern. We have linguistics experts who can make sense of the most bizarre cultural practices. We have xenopsychologists who can explain why beings do anything they do." She gestured helplessly at the screens. "But this is beyond our comprehension." The silence that followed was so profound that it registered on the studio's acoustic monitoring equipment as a technical malfunction. The emergency meeting in the Galactic Broadcasting Network's executive boardroom resembled a crisis management session rather than a routine programming discussion. Representatives from 12 different species sat around a crystalline conference table, their universal translators working overtime to process the unprecedented situation. Director Kextarian, a methane-breathing executive whose species had invented the concept of entertainment, floated in his environmental suit while reviewing the footage. "In 14,000 years of broadcasting," he wheezed through his translator, "we have never had a show where the host simply stopped talking." The Vexthrani legal representative, Verbaticus Maximus, whose full name took 17 minutes to pronounce correctly, was uncharacteristically brief in his explanation. "The hosts are experiencing what our medical team calls cognitive commentary collapse. They've encountered a species that exists outside their ability to process and explain." On the main screen, the final broadcast footage played in slow motion. Zixandra, Blurbltep, Quickspeak, and Verbosani sat in their studio chairs, staring at the human feeds with expressions of profound bewilderment. The last words spoken during the broadcast came from Verbosani in a whisper so quiet the audio enhancement systems barely picked it up. We have documented 50,000 species across the galaxy. We have commentary protocols for every possible behavior. But these humans, they have achieved something we thought impossible. They have made the Vexthrani speechless." The camera had continued rolling for another 18 minutes of complete silence before the automatic emergency broadcast system activated. "The medical implications are staggering," reported Chief Physician Bubblewrap from the Vexthrani Medical Authority. "A Vexthrani who cannot speak is like a star that has stopped producing light. It goes against everything we understand about their biology. They literally need to communicate to maintain proper brain function." Director Kextarian consulted his notes, which consisted mostly of question marks and confused squiggles. "What are our options?" "We could try exposure therapy," suggested Dr. Mindfix from the Galactic Psychiatric Institute. "Gradually introduce them to slightly less incomprehensible species until they rebuild their confidence in universal logic." "How long would that take?" asked the director. "Based on the severity of their condition? Approximately 400 years. The network's head of programming, a spider-like creature named Webweaver, clicked thoughtfully. "What if we rebrand the show? Mysteries of the Universe. Species that broke our brains?" "The problem," interrupted Verbicus Maximus, "is that this sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow one species to exist without commentary, what happens when we discover other incomprehensible beings? Our entire broadcasting model depends on the Vexthrani ability to explain everything." A junior executive, fresh from the Academy of Cosmic Communications, raised a tentative appendage. What if we just accept that some things can't be explained?" The boardroom fell silent. The concept was so foreign to their understanding of media and entertainment that several translators malfunctioned trying to process it. Finally, Director Kextarian made the decision that would change galactic broadcasting forever. Effective. Immediately, Primitive Planet Chronicles is suspended indefinitely. We'll air reruns of Dancing with the Asteroids until further notice. The official cancellation notice, broadcast across all galactic networks, simply read, "Some species transcend commentary." Meanwhile, on Earth, completely unaware that they had broken the most talkative species in the galaxy, humans continued being human. In Florida, a man was attempting to teach his pet flamingo to play chess. In Ohio, someone was building a house entirely out of cheese. In Australia, a person was wrestling with a kangaroo over a sandwich. And somewhere in the cosmos, 4 Vex Thrangi sat in comfortable chairs, receiving therapy from the galaxy's best xenopsychologists, slowly learning to speak again by starting with simple concepts like water flows downhill and gravity pulls things down. They had a long way to go before they could handle Florida Man Strikes Again.